Your body is preparing for a famine that may have ended before your grandparents were born. Right now, as you read this, your metabolism is making decisions rooted in survival events you never experienced, famines you never suffered through, hunger your conscious mind has never once felt. And the unsettling part is that it might be doing exactly what it was designed to do. Think about that for a second. Every time your body clings to fat a little too stubbornly, every time your appetite surges after a diet, every time your blood sugar swings in ways that seem almost irrational, that might not be a malfunction. That might be ancient programming running exactly on schedule. Here is what evolution actually did with famine. It killed most people. The ones who died were the ones whose bodies burned through energy too freely, who couldn't store fat efficiently, whose metabolisms ran hot and fast and generous with every calorie that came in. They did not survive. And the ones who did survive, the ones whose bodies were almost obsessively protective of every unit of stored energy, those are the people you descended from. Famine was not just a tragedy. It was a filter, and your metabolism is the result of everything that filter selected for. Scientists call this the thrifty gene hypothesis, and it changed the way we think about bodies entirely. The idea, first proposed by geneticist James Neal in 1962, is that certain gene variants helped our ancestors store fat rapidly and resist burning through energy reserves. In a world where food arrived in bursts and disappeared for months at a time, that thriftiness was the difference between life and death. But move that same biology into a world of constant food availability, and suddenly the very traits that kept your ancestors alive start working against you. There is also a related concept called the thrifty phenotype, which goes even further. It suggests that the conditions a person experiences early in life, even in the womb, can tune their metabolism toward scarcity or abundance. A body that develops in a low-nutrition environment essentially learns to expect shortage. It adjusts its insulin sensitivity, its appetite signals, its fat storage mechanisms, all of it calibrated for a world where the next meal is never guaranteed. And here is where it gets deeply real. Your metabolism, your appetite, your insulin sensitivity, even your stress response. These are not random settings. They function more like survival presets. When food is restricted, cortisol rises, signaling the body to hold onto fat rather than burn it. Appetite hormones like ghrelin surge, sometimes staying elevated for months after a diet ends. Insulin sensitivity shifts in ways that prioritize storing glucose rather than spending it. Your body is not broken. It is behaving exactly the way a body should behave if the world outside is dangerous and unpredictable. History gives us devastating proof that these mechanisms are real. During the Irish famine of the 1840s, roughly 1 million people died and another million fled within just a few years. The bodies that survived were the ones most capable of extracting maximum value from minimal food. During the Dutch hunger winter of 1944 and 1945, Nazi forces blocked food supplies to the Netherlands, and the population was reduced to eating tulip bulbs. Decades later, the children born to mothers who were pregnant during that famine showed measurable differences in their metabolism. Their rates of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease were strikingly elevated compared to those not exposed. Their bodies carried something forward from a hunger they never personally experienced. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed somewhere between 2 and 3 million people. The famines that swept across China in the late 1950s and early 1960s killed tens of millions. These were not distant abstractions, they were massive, population-level events that reached into the biology of every survivor and reshaped what survival even looked like for the generations that followed. So when your body behaves as though scarcity is always just around the corner, when it resists letting go of stored energy, when it overreacts to calorie restriction, when it drives hunger in ways that feel almost desperate, you are experiencing the logic of those events playing out in your own cells. Not as memory, not as psychology, as biology. And that raises one of the most extraordinary questions in modern science. Can the biological echo of famine, that deep metabolic tuning toward survival, actually be passed from parent to child? Not just through inherited gene variants selected over thousands of years, but through something faster, something more direct, a kind of biological memory that transmits the experience of starvation from one generation to the next without changing the DNA sequence itself? That question used to sound like science fiction. Now it sits at the center of one of the most rapidly evolving fields in all of biology. Because the evidence is starting to suggest that what your ancestors survived did not stay with them. It came with you. And that field has a name: epigenetics. And once you understand what it actually means, you will never think about inheritance the same way again. Here is the simplest way to put it. Your DNA is like a master script. Every cell in your body carries the same script, but not every cell reads every line. Some genes get turned up, some get turned down, some get silenced almost completely. And the thing that controls all of that, the system that decides which parts of the script get read and which parts get ignored, that is epigenetics. It is not a change to the DNA itself. It is a change in how the DNA behaves. Think of it as the difference between the words in a book and the way a particular reader chooses to emphasize them. The text stays the same. The meaning shifts. What makes this extraordinary is that those patterns of emphasis, those decisions about which genes to amplify and which to mute, can be inherited. Not over thousands of years of natural selection, but within a single lifetime, sometimes within a generation or two. The Dutch hunger winter gave us the most powerful evidence we have. Researchers followed the children and grandchildren of women who were pregnant during that famine. What they found was not just elevated rates of obesity and diabetes, though those were real and measurable. They found differences in the way certain genes were expressed. Genes involved in growth, in fat metabolism, in insulin regulation. The starvation had not rewritten the DNA, but it had left marks on top of it, chemical tags called methylation patterns that changed how those genes behaved for decades afterward. And in some cases, those marks appeared to travel into the next generation. Children born to mothers who were malnourished during pregnancy came into the world with lower birth weights and subtly altered metabolic settings. Their bodies had essentially received a signal before birth. The outside world is scarce. Tune accordingly. And when those same children grew up and encountered a world that was not scarce at all, a world full of processed food and unlimited calories, their calibrated for shortage biology became a liability. Higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of type 2 diabetes, a metabolism that had been told to hoard and found itself swimming in excess. The research coming out of other famine populations tells a similar story. Studies of descendants from the Swedish Överkalix famine, the Chinese Great Leap Forward famine, the Bengali famine, all of them point toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. Severe nutritional stress in one generation leaves a biological fingerprint in the next. The stress biology changes. The metabolic thresholds shift. Something travels forward that cannot be explained by shared diet or shared culture alone. And that caveat matters, because the science here is real, but it is also genuinely complicated. One of the hardest problems in this research is separating what is inherited biology from what is learned behavior and shared environment. If your grandmother survived a famine, she may have passed on epigenetic marks, but she also may have passed on food anxiety, eating patterns, attitudes towards scarcity, ways of relating to meals that shaped how her children ate and how those children raised you. Disentangling the biological signal from the cultural one is extraordinarily difficult. Researchers are working on it. The honest answer is that the evidence is strong, the mechanisms are plausible, and the full picture is still being assembled. But here is what we know enough to say with confidence. Your body carries information about the conditions your ancestors navigated, whether that comes through gene variants selected over centuries, through epigenetic marks passed across a few generations, or through deeply embedded behavioral patterns absorbed in childhood. The result looks the same from the inside. A metabolism that treats abundance like a threat. A stress response that runs hotter than the situation requires. An appetite that doesn't fully believe the next meal is guaranteed. And now place that biology inside a modern world. A world where processed food is engineered specifically to override your satiety signals. A world where you sit for most of your waking hours. A world where your stress response, which evolved to handle short-term physical emergencies, gets triggered by emails and deadlines and financial worry, and never fully powers down. That is the mismatch. Your ancient survival hardware running in an environment it was never built for. So what do you actually do with this? You start by stabilizing your blood sugar. Not because carbohydrates are the enemy, but because wild glucose swings mimic the metabolic chaos of scarcity and keep your survival systems in a low-grade state of alarm. Protein at every meal, fiber from whole foods, avoiding the ultra-processed spikes. These are not diet rules. They are signals you are sending to a very old system. You are safe, you are fed. Stand down, you build muscle. Skeletal muscle is the most metabolically active tissue you have. It improves insulin sensitivity, it burns energy at rest, it literally changes the conversation your body is having with itself about whether resources are abundant or scarce. You sleep. Genuinely, consistently, without negotiation. Sleep deprivation is one of the most powerful triggers for cortisol elevation and appetite dysregulation your body knows. One bad night, and your hunger hormones behave like you just came off a 3-day fast. Sleep is not optional recovery. It is metabolic medicine. And you reduce chronic stress wherever you can. Not because stress is weakness, but because a nervous system that never exits threat mode keeps your fat storage, your appetite, and your blood sugar all tilted toward the survival settings your ancestors needed, and you don't. Your body is not broken. It is adapted, exquisitely, ruthlessly, beautifully adapted to a world that no longer exists. The goal is not to fight that biology. The goal is to speak its language, to send it the signals it needs to finally, genuinely believe that the famine is over. Work with what your ancestors built, because it kept them alive long enough to build you.